Welcome to the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners Policy Session on November 7, 2024. County Administrator Gary Schmidt, you're up.
Thank you, Chair Smith. Your first policy session this afternoon is Recovery Center Update for this month of, well, it says October, meant for November. We're going to give you a monthly update on the status of the progress of the Recovery Center project. Cindy Becker is not able to be here today, so Mary Rumbaugh has graciously agreed to present. Mary is the Behavioral Health Division Director in Health, Housing, and Human Services. Go ahead, please, Mary.
Great. Good afternoon. I almost said good morning. Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners, County Administrator Schmidt, Mary Rumbaugh, Behavioral Health Division Director. So you do have a progress report attached to your staff report, but Cindy and I wanted to call out a couple of additional details or a little bit more context to what's been happening, which is a lot. On the date that you took action to purchase the property, we had a lot of media coverage. It was very widespread and very positive overall. We had 6 television channels air the news in approximately 30 different on-air pieces, and we're actually waiting for a more in-depth piece from the Oregonian in the next couple of weeks, so that's exciting. Also on the same date that you approved that purchase on October 17th, we did send letters of solicitation to the neighbors and businesses within that area to join the Good Neighbor group. With some additional outreach to some of the surrounding area. And to date, as of yesterday, we've actually received 20 responses from interested neighbors and businesses, as well as identification of individuals with lived experience to be part of that. So we're looking at that list right now because we want to make sure it's really balanced, and then that will come back to the board for an update to you all. The other thing that's been happening that I'm really proud of is the stories of recovery videos. So they've been out we've been posting them through social media. They're on our website. Right now we have 3 stories of individuals with lived experience courageously sharing their journey of their own addiction and really what it would have meant to them had a recovery center been available at the time that they were ready to get treatment. Really powerful, really moving. I think a really amazing way to break down the stigma about what does it mean to be struggling with substance use currently in your life. So those are the biggest highlights from the updates that we have. Our notice of funding opportunity, as you know, we're searching for a provider to partner with. That notice of funding opportunity is currently active. It closes on November 21st, and we hope to, we'll be reviewing those at the beginning of December. So we will, in December, know who our provider is going to be. So some really exciting things that are happening. But I would welcome any questions or clarifications you might have.
Thank you very much. Commissioner West.
Thank you, Mary. This is really exciting. I love these updates. I've gotten a few phone calls from people that are interested in the NOFO. Some of the questions I felt like I could maybe answer, but they may need more in-depth kind of instruction or collaboration with their staff with those questions. Do they call you? Who's the best contact? And
They should go to procurement to Ryan Rice.
To Ryan Rice, okay. And if they have kind of understanding scope of practice, does that go to Cindy or you?
I would direct everything to Ryan, and then he will work with those of us who he feels like are the content experts. Yeah.
And then I would love to. I have not seen the stories of recovery. I'm very interested in seeing them. We're on our website. I don't see that in our packet directly.
It's on that link, isn't it?
I don't see. Am I missing the?
So we have a dedicated recovery center page. It's on that page.
Perfect.
Yeah, if you scroll down.
Yep, I know where that's at.
Yep.
Page 2 in our presentation.
Perfect.
We had a number of people that helped inspire this from all over, from Oregon, Canada, California, Texas, and we were looking, at the Recovery Summit. Are we still in collaboration with those kind of thought leaders from outside of Oregon about how we should kind of maybe dream and figure this out, or is this mostly being done in-house?
Well, what I can say is that the Notice of Funding Opportunity Scoring Review Committee is made up of not only internal partners, but folks who are currently part of our task group and beyond. So really folks with some of that expertise, as well as individuals with lived experience. I'm not sure how much Cindy continues to be in contact with those thought partners, but certainly I think something as we're moving forward, because this is obviously a marathon, right? Not a sprint. And so there will be, I think, opportunities for us to think about how to reconnect or get updates or, however that's going to look. I think there's an opportunity to continue that conversation.
Terrific. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Great.
Commissioner Savas?
Good presentation, thank you. My question, whether it's the world you're in, behavioral health, or whether it's in this world of either recovery and that treating that kind of population, and knowing that a lot of dollars have come in through SHS in the region. So my question is more about the workforce. Are we seeing issues where maybe we're running out of people to do the work, regardless of pay? And how would that affect not just this world here for this center, but even on the behavioral health side?
Yeah, we have not found the unicorn when it comes to workforce. I think we're rebounding over the last 4 years, though, for sure. And that is certainly something that we did a mandatory pre-proposal meeting with any interested proposers for the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Workforce was certainly a topic and a conversation around what are they currently doing to really to bring the workforce in and, frankly, retain them, right? Because the next neighbor offers another $1 more an hour, and then people, move to that program. So I think the good news, Commissioner Savas, is that we are going to be phasing this in. So it's not like we're just immediately, serving, 1,000 people and we need, X number within the workforce. So I think we're going to have to be really thoughtful. The provider who's awarded the contract's going to need to really think about how are they positioning themselves to make sure they are the place that people want to come and do this work. I think the fact that it is really Clackamas is going to be on the map for this because the big difference is going to be the recovery housing connection piece to it. And I really hope that inspires the workforce to think about coming and supporting a really impressive project like this. But I think it's a real reality, but I'm hoping we're going to continue to see the rebounding. I believe we're going to continue to see workforce legislatively, some of those investments around tuition offset, things that really do entice people to come into the behavioral health system.
Does that include, I will say not lowering the bar, that's not the right way I really want to word that, but some of the certification requirements as well?
Yeah. Yes, those conversations are ongoing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for this presentation today? Thank you for explaining the possible pots of money going forward on this. There is no recommendation today. This is just an update. Thank you, Mary, for coming forward.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Gary, what's next?
All right, if you're ready, we're going to move forward. The next policy session is National Flood Insurance Potential Compliance Measures. Transportation and Development staff will present. Dan Johnson, the Director of Transportation and Development, and Jennifer Hughes, the Planning Director from the department. There is requested for board action today on this item. Go ahead, please.
Oh, sorry. I was trying to mix things up.
On this side of the bench.
Welcome.
Hey, good afternoon, Sheriff Smith and Commissioners. We have the pleasure of sitting up here and having a discussion with you about something that's fairly complicated, and we're going to try to make today's decision as easy as possible. That is our attempt over the next programmed hour, but hopefully less than an hour. So before we get into this discussion, I want you to take a gander at attachment A in your packet. We're going to give you some background really quick. Some of you may know, some of you may not. We have what's called special flood hazard area throughout Clackamas County. It is urban, rural, and wild. It's everywhere in the county. And essentially, just to give you an idea, when you look at that map there, That floodplain inundated area is about 15,000 acres in size approximately, to give you an idea about size, scope, and scale. Okay? So when you think about floodplain, we think about, obviously, we do a lot of actions to prevent flooding and flood prevention and for development, things like that. But there's also, you have to keep in mind, there's a National Flood Insurance Program. And essentially, the National Flood Insurance Program is a federally backed program that provides flood insurance to homeowners, renters, and businesses, and is managed by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. Okay? So you've got a floodplain, you've got a flood insurance program that insures all the improvements within those areas. That's all managed by FEMA. Okay? This is kind of setting the basis for why we're here to talk about this today. So essentially, we have, FEMA has contacted us, and Jennifer's going to get into the details of that, but contacted us about some specifics or options that are available to the county now, because there have been some legal challenges regarding the proposed development or proposed changes to their code in the floodplain areas. We have a development code. Clackamas County has a zoning and development ordinance, has a section of code related to floodplain development, says how high you can build it. It's got to be out of the floodplain, no fill, a variety of things. It dictates development. So we are in the program right now, okay? I want to highlight for you what happens if we're not in the program, because one of the options we're going to talk to you about is getting out of the National Flood Insurance Program. Because if we choose to do that, the rest of this doesn't even really matter. I'm assuming you're going to say no to this, but I want to make sure you understand what it means to get out of the program. Basically, what that means is that no resident within that flood insurance area will be able to buy a National Flood Insurance Program policy. They can buy private policies, but not these federal-backed policies. It would mean that we have currently, according to FEMA, we have policies in place that there's about 980 policies in Clackamas County alone. The value of those improvements in those policies that are covered through those policies is about $290 million worth of improvements. And if we pulled out of the program, they would not be able to renew those flood insurance policies for those improvements. No federal grants or loans for development will be made. No federal disaster assistance will be provided for repair for those improvements that are in those areas. There's issues about mortgage insurance that would be raised. And essentially, federally insured or regulated lending institutions, there's additional notification that's required regarding housing acquisition or development acquisition when the floodplain. It's not a good set of circumstances if we get out of the National Flood Insurance Program. Okay? That sets the backdrop. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Jennifer to kind of briefly discuss what challenges FEMA is facing now and what they have asked of us to help educate you in the choices that we're going to present to you for discussion and consideration today. So with that, Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Hughes. I'm the County Planning Director. So what brought us to this discussion today is a process that started about 15 years ago. In 2009, FEMA was sued by some environmental organizations alleging that the National Flood Insurance Program violates the Endangered Species Act. As a result of that, FEMA entered into a negotiated settlement and agreed to consult with the National Marine Fisheries Service, which is the federal agency that has jurisdiction over the species that were in question. National Marine Fisheries, or NMFS for short, issued a biological opinion in 2016 and said, yes, the NFIP is resulting in jeopardy to a number of fish species and the southern resident killer whales, and recommended a number of changes to the way the NFIP works that, in their opinion, would then bring the NFIP into compliance with the Endangered Species Act. And I do want to be clear, this does not just affect Clackamas County. It affects 30 Oregon counties, as well as all of the cities within those counties. So FEMA started working on an implementation plan to take that opinion from NMFS and turn it into regulations that would apply to communities that participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. They came out with a draft implementation plan in 2021. There have been sort of a number of delays throughout this process. But they began putting that implementation plan through an environmental review. So ultimately, they will be issuing an environmental impact statement and then implementing a final plan, they estimate in 2027. So that was sort of the path that we were on. You know, jurisdictions have been monitoring this. We knew something was going to be coming, but we didn't really know exactly what or when. And then rather unexpectedly in July, and I really don't think, to my knowledge, no local jurisdiction in Oregon or the state expected that this was going to happen. FEMA issued letters to all of the participating communities, that's in your packet, attachment C, saying, hey, guess what? You now need to implement what we are calling pre-implementation compliance measures, or PICMs for short, in advance of this final process that we expect to finish in 2027. So we've been scrambling. All the jurisdictions in Oregon have been scrambling to try to figure out what exactly does this mean and how do we do this by the deadline that's been set. They are advising, and I want to be clear, this is what FEMA is telling us. Whether they can require this and how we respond to it exactly is kind of a different question. But FEMA is telling us and other communities in Oregon that we must implement one of three choices for these pre-implementation compliance measures. We need to tell them what our choice is by December 1st, and then begin implementing that. But again, it gets complicated because what they're saying is, well, if you choose certain options, you may have longer to implement that option, but in the meantime, you still have to implement one of the pathways before then. So it is very confusing. They've given us three choices. One is to adopt a model code. The second one is to do what they're calling site-by-site habitat assessment, which would mean that each applicant who comes in and wants to do development in our special flood hazard area would individually have to do an assessment of what the effect of that development is on the habitat. And then the third option is the county could prohibit all new development in the special flood hazard area. So those are the three choices they've given us. They've said choose by December 1st. And they've said, if you choose the model code, you can wait and not actually adopt the code until July of next year. But in the meantime, you would need to start doing the site-by-site habitat assessment December 1st. So really, we have to start doing something according to them. What happens if we don't? We put our participation in the National Flood Insurance Program at risk, which has significant consequences, as Dan mentioned. The timing of that, however, is not likely to be immediate. FEMA is signaling that, particularly if jurisdictions are sort of working with them, we're telling them, you know, we're kind of on a trajectory of potentially being able to adopt something by this point. Here's our compliance plan, that they're unlikely to begin sort of enforcement in the near term. But ultimately, they would pay us what's called a compliance visit and talk to us about how we're out of compliance and how we might come into compliance, and then they could move forward with, I believe it's probation first and then suspension. But again, that's not something that would happen immediately. So staff has started trying to figure out what these different options mean. And there are a number of sort of legal and practical considerations which are listed on page 4 of your worksheet. I'm just going to kind of go through those quickly. As I alluded to, this is what FEMA is telling us we have to do. There is some question, some lack of clarity about whether they have the authority to require us to implement these pre-implementation compliance measures. It's a bit of an open question. There appear to be conflicts between the FEMA directives and state land use law. I've identified probably at least 4 or 5 ways that we might have difficulty complying with the federal requirements given state requirements. And at the moment, there is no identified effort to sync those two things up. I think the state and FEMA are both aware that these conflicts exist, but it's unclear what, if anything, is going to happen about that in the near term. There's the reality that any of these PICMs will impose new burdens on property owners who have land in the special flood hazard area. There's no question about that. Both the model code and the site-by-site habitat assessment option impose new burdens on us, specifically in planning and zoning, to administer these new guidelines. So it's a whole set of things that our technical staff has to get up to speed on and figure out, what does this mean? How do we explain this to the public? How do we apply this when we're reviewing development permits in the floodplain? And then finally, amending the zoning and development ordinance, as you're all familiar with, requires an extensive public process. And in this case, it would include individual mailed notice to all of the property owners in the special flood hazard area, letting them know that a new restriction on their property is coming. So you can imagine how well that's likely to go over. So we do need to anticipate that there's going to be staff time involved in fielding questions and, helping folks understand. There would be public hearings at the Planning Commission and the board before any sort of adoption of new regulations. So, it puts us in a difficult position. We've got a federal program that offers significant value to our property owners. That's the National Flood Insurance Program. And yet, we have these new regulatory requirements that may conflict with state land use law and impose new burdens on property owners and the county. And underneath all of that is the Endangered Species Act, which we're obligated to comply with regardless. So there's a lot of layers here. Given all of that, staff has identified some options that the board might want to consider. And those are on page 6. Option 1, which is the one that staff is recommending, is that you would direct staff to conduct detailed technical and legal analysis of 2 of the 3 pre-implementation compliance measures. That would be the model code and the site-by-site habitat assessment. That you would direct staff to submit a draft pre-implementation compliance measure implementation schedule to FEMA. So we submit something by that December 1st deadline that outlines a draft schedule, realizing we can't commit to exactly what will happen in the future, but a draft compliance schedule. And that staff would return to the board for a policy session as close to the Federal Emergency Management Agency's December 1st deadline as feasible to share the findings and consider selection of a pre-implementation compliance measure. The second option is to direct staff to draft comprehensive plan and ZDO amendments and schedule public hearings to implement the third PICM option, which is to prohibit all development in the special flood hazard area. And the third option would be to direct staff to do no further work at this time. So, as I mentioned, staff is recommending option 1, and I'm happy to answer questions about why that is and anything else you are interested in.
And I'd like to expand 1 second. Just so you're aware, not only the state of Oregon, but also our congressional delegation have provided comments to FEMA to say that these timelines are unreasonable. So we've been working with PGA on those angles to make sure that message is getting. There's been no response from FEMA as of this date.
Well, certainly, the federal government knows that every state in America has a conflict with their own laws in this. It's not just not Oregon's land use law. So we're not alone in that. Gee, I'm really going out on a limb on that, I know. What's the cost to us to implement this?
I don't think we know. It's really a question of how much additional staff time ends up being involved. We process about 29, this is on average, 29 floodplain development permits a year. That's going back to 2016, that's typical. We're already doing that work. So this is an additional layer, though, of review that we're gonna have some staff time to get up to speed on. In terms of a direct new cost, if we were to end up deciding to have what's called third-party review, so if we were to hire a consultant, for instance, who would probably be a biologist, that would look at whatever it is that applicants are submitting, that would be an additional cost, and there'd be a question to the board as to whether the county pays that or the applicant pays the fee for that consultant. So we haven't come to any conclusions yet. This sort of part of option 1 would be for staff to continue to do a deep dive on what these options are so we can give you some better guidance. But I think that would be a potential new cost. And then for applicants, they will almost certainly need to hire a consultant regardless of the option that we choose in order to navigate this process.
So the applicant, are you talking about people who own land in a floodplain and want to build new?
Want to do anything. It's
Anything.
not just building new. So, and I skipped over that.
So the new regulations, just a minute, it's okay.
Yeah.
So the new regulations apply to everything, current. So do the new regulations apply to the current houses or whatever in floodplains, and are they required to upgrade?
To retroactively go back, to the best of our knowledge, no.
No. But
Okay, so
any new
really it's
development.
new or anything new? that
Yeah,
you
if
wanna
they're
do.
adding on, new driveway, new shop, new anything.
What if we said no more building in floodplains, no new building in floodplains? What would happen then? Because I don't think it's unlike when we said, not this board, but the county said, no building in landslide zone areas.
It's funny, we talked about that, and I think that one of the topics in our discussions with council and one of the discussions, because when we initially proposed that, my mind was around into perpetuity. Maybe that's a short-term moratorium until we get a handle on what that looks like. And we've asked council to take a look at that.
Does council have
What-
council, do you have a comment on that? Okay.
Not yet. There's a process for a moratorium that we are working with county council's office on to figure out what that might look like. And we can bring that back for consideration as well. Because essentially you could look at a shorter term delay, prohibiting on a shorter term basis until there's more information regarding this and process regarding this, et cetera.
And would that be considered taking by the county, and would we be sued?
I think there's some risk under ballot measure, back in the day, ballot measure 49, which some of you remember, does impose, some limits in terms of what the county can do and to restrict or prohibit existing uses of properties. So we would want to evaluate that pretty closely. The other thing, I guess, on the prohibition of development is just to realize that we've done some preliminary analysis using our mapping software, and it's about 5,700 tax lots that are partially or wholly in the special flood hazard area, and over 3,000 of those have improvements currently valued at more than $10,000. So you're talking about a lot of existing development that would sort of be locked into what they have now, and potentially some lots that are currently buildable that would not be. It depends on a lot of factors and zoning and, a lot of things. We don't know exactly how many, but I think permanently banning development in those areas would be a significant issue. It doesn't mean you shouldn't, but there's some pretty careful consideration we would want to do.
So this is very much an unfunded, very expensive mandate. And is there any legal action being taken against FEMA to somehow alter or slow down this program?
There's been discussion about that. There is a group called Oregonians for Floodplain Protection that consists of some local jurisdictions as well as some interest groups that did sue FEMA at one point, and that ended up, I think they determined it wasn't ripe. I'll sort of look at counsel here. But there's discussions that group may pursue something, but I think we're not sure at this point. I don't know if you have any more information.
Thank you.
I think the litigation so far actually has been on the opposite side. It's been environmental groups, which probably force FEMA into this position.
What was that, Jane, the environmental groups would force what?
Environmental groups, I think, have filed litigation trying to force FEMA into this action they took in July, which is why they're doing it. So I think there's just a lot of litigation flying around out there, but so far not any brought by local governments.
Mr. Salas?
Well, I think some of my questions have been answered. I just wanted to go over them first of all. The first one I wrote down is how many permits do we get a year? You said 29, okay? So the other question essentially I had, so existing developments that are they're grandfathered in? I've heard that's a yes.
What's there now, yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They are, yes, to answer your question.
Okay. So what's on your mind?
What's on my mind is the fact that if we don't implement something to change our process, those existing developments, though grandfathered in, still would not be able to apply again for the National Flood Insurance Program if we don't change our process going forward.
Okay, so.
Does that make sense? I mean,
Well, in a way.
So it's really odd because I built to the current code, in my understanding. If I'm wrong with this,
Yeah,
please
no.
let me know. But so basically, we had a code in place. They built to that code. Basically, you built to that code. And that code was pretty clear and objective. It's like, hey, you know what? You had a report that came in from a certified individual, talks about elevation of the base flood elevation. Is it above the floodplain? Yes or no? Can water go through the facility? Yes or no? I'm a planner again. Listen to this. All these different things. And then what happened? And so basically, they can build. Okay. Now, FEMA's saying if we don't change our process for new development going forward, that development isn't retroactively still viable for the National Flood Insurance Program. They will not be able to renew their insurance on that existing facility that was built to code at that particular point in time.
That doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Well, it's the federal government. I don't have any, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so the other question I wrote down was, and I think you already said it, but you don't have any idea. So give me, and you don't know yet, but I'm just trying to get an assessment of what the cost burden is going to be for a developer. A new burden, right? A new soft cost. And how how would we handle that in a sense that whereby, we promise a permit within a certain period of time? Was it 60 days? Is that the number?
Legally, it's either 120 or 150, but that includes if it goes to the hearings officer on appeal,
Okay.
so.
But this would be is this something that they do in advance of filing an application?
They would need to submit whatever professional assessment we end up requiring in our code as part of that initial application, yes.
So it'd be smarter for them not to actually seek the permit, but just start the process
Correct.
so that the clock doesn't start.
Yes,
Okay.
And
correct.
then in addition, we would probably have to hire expertise to review that information because we really aren't qualified, because it's no net impact. And that isn't just looking at an elevation line to say, yeah, that report says the base flood elevation is 1 foot above the floodplain. It's an environmental assessment, and we don't have staff on board that can do that.
So give me a level of magnitude as far as what you might think, because it's just speculating, what that cost burden would be compared to any other aspect of a development, period. That's not in a floodplain. I mean, give me a comparable. It would be as bad or worse than X.
Yeah, I don't know the price of like, say, a wetland delineation. I mean, it may be along those lines. Certainly, the person would have to go out in the field and be doing some kind of assessment. I can tell you, currently, the only technical reports that we always require are, if you're in a groundwater limited area, they have to hire a consultant. Those are running, just for the peer review of them, over $3,000. So I'm sure the original study costs more than that, but that's paid by the private, applicant. Traffic studies, I mean, I think we're talking well over $10,000 for traffic studies. So, that's going to be, I would assume, we're talking about thousands, but I don't know how many
I
thousand.
can't imagine they're less than 10,000.
Yeah.
On the private, like if I was going to develop a piece of property for me to secure, somebody doing an environmental assessment to determine I have no net impact, I can't imagine it's less than 10,000 bucks.
Okay.
And then there's the review cost on our side as well, so.
Yeah, I mean, with the model code in theory, and again, if you choose option one, we're going to do a more of a deep dive on this, that we're just now they're doing technical webinars to try to tell us what this all means, FEMA is. But the model code, in theory, may require less professional help for the applicant than the site-by-site habitat assessment. It's pretty clear if we're doing this site-by-site, they're going to have to hire like a biologist to do this case by case. So from that standpoint, potentially, the model code would be cheaper.
So, yeah, well, it sounds like it would probably, for those who don't have the wherewithal or the funding, it could be a de facto moratorium, so to speak, in a way.
I mean, for those smaller projects, it's concerning. And it isn't, I skipped over this, I didn't intend to, but there's really three things they have to do with these, we're talking, what does this mean? Well, it's limits on fill in the floodplain. And when I say fill, it's not just dirt, like structures. So their foundation, all of that, they can have no net increase in that, which means that if you're going to put a building in the floodplain, you're going to have to essentially excavate somewhere else, and that has to be engineered, and so that's a cost. No net increase in impervious surface, so I think we're really talking, or they have to do a stormwater plan. Well, that's also a consultant. And then no net loss of trees over 6-inch diameter. So that's the easiest one, because you have to plant, 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 or something. I mean, potentially you're talking about mitigation banking for some smaller sites, maybe to try to be able to do this off-site. That's a little bit of a longer-term thing. But yeah, it's kind of a lot.
And it's not even the design component to it, it's the subsequent confirmation. Because we have to have their stamp on the confirmation, they built it
They have to actually
pursuant
do
to
it.
this. Yeah,
Right.
so it's not just it's not an
Yeah.
architect coming in and designing the building and submitting it, there's a pre and a post review that's done, so.
My last question. Earlier on, you mentioned a scenario in which we don't know if they're going to pay for it or we're going to pay for it. So could you just go back to that? I missed
Sure.
the context.
Sure. So there's there's the first question on any land use application, it's the applicant's burden to sort of demonstrate they meet the criteria. So I think it's pretty clear that whatever we end up requiring, whether it's the model code or the site-by-site, the applicant is going to be paying for whatever experts they need to meet those standards. The question is, if they've given us a report and planners are really good at knowing sort of general things about a lot of stuff, but we're not biologists. We're not necessarily going to know that what we're looking at actually works. So there's a question at that point about whether the county would contract with a third party, like we do with these groundwater reports, have a professional on contract. So as I mentioned, these groundwater, they cost about $3,600. Well, we charge part of that to the applicant, and the county ends up probably picking up part of it because our fees may not be quite keeping pace with the cost. So that ends up being a choice for the board on the fee schedule. Do you say a floodplain development permit right now costs X, and now we're going to charge X plus because we need to pay for this consultant to review these, or is that going to be a general fund expense? Because those are really the options, of course, in planning, one of the two.
Well, hopefully there's recovery of that. We're not, if we do that, that we're neutral.
It's a discussion we'll
Yes.
have to have with the board about the cost.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Scholl?
Yes, good afternoon. So is the National Flood Insurance Program the only way a property owner can insure property in the floodplain?
So it is my understanding, and I want to be very clear, I am not an expert on the flood insurance market. It's my understanding that getting alternate insurance used to be very difficult, and that now there is a private insurance market, but we don't know how developed it is, and we don't know what the cost of those policies are relative to the NFIP. Certainly something we could look into
Well,
and
okay.
get back to you.
Okay. So it's very expensive, we know that, to have a home next to the river, like down on the Sandy, for example. So is there, between the options we have here, is there one that might end up being most sensitive to trying to mitigate higher insurance costs? Is that possible? Or does it not affect that?
Yeah.
You're mitigating the higher insurance costs by the implementation of the standards. So basically, that's the question we have for you. It's like, our recommendation to you is to allow us to go away, come back to you
Okay.
with these thoughts in mind.
Okay,
Knowing all
so-
of you very well, your thoughts are the fact that, we don't want to limit opportunities for the citizens of Clackamas County to develop their property as reasonably as they can.
Right.
What's the most reasonable path forward? What's the most cost-efficient path forward? And to come back with you with a recommendation around the options that are there.
Okay, so
And-
that's option one.
Yeah, and so the mitigation, you talk about how to mitigate the cost, and you also have the stability of the insurance program. I mean, this is a federally funded insurance program that if you meet these standards, you should be applicable and be able to pay it. It's an option, so.
Yeah, okay. All right, good, thank you.
You say this comes from FEMA, so it's administrative directed, not congressionally directed? Congress did not pass a law saying FEMA will do this, so it came from FEMA, which means it's the administration.
Yeah, it came from it originated from a negotiated settlement from this lawsuit. I don't know who gets to sign off on those, but I don't think it's Congress.
And, of course, we don't know the details of the negotiated settlement that requires us to do this. I'm thinking out loud, did FEMA just throw in some extra stuff because it happens to be FEMA that we don't know about that went beyond what the negotiated settlement was?
The settlement stipulated they had to go to National Marine Fisheries and that this biological opinion was issued. That is public, anybody can read it, and it is my understanding that these requirements do correlate with what that biological opinion says. It's just the timing that's a little questionable.
All right. Commissioners, any more questions on this? Very frustrating topic. We have some options here. Staff recommends option 1. Does anybody want to make a motion?
Chair, do you need the entire option read in total? Is that?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
I move to direct staff to conduct detailed technical and legal analysis of 2 of the 3 pre-implementation compliance measure options, the model code and the site-by-site habitat assessment. Submit a draft pre-implementation compliance measure implementation schedule to FEMA, and return to the board for a policy session as close to the Federal Emergency Management Agency's December 1 deadline as feasible to share the findings and consider selection of a pre-implementation compliance measure.
Commissioner Schull has recommended that we adopt recommendation 1, and I'm not going to read it all here, of the FEMA, just a minute, let me go back up here. Just a minute, of the National Flood Insurance Program potential compliance measures. And Commissioner Schrader has seconded that motion. Any further discussion on this? Sorry, I'm reading as I'm going on to scroll up 10 pages to get the title. Okay. Hence the complexity of this. Any other? Well, this is going to be fun. Okay. Clerk, take the poll, please.
Commissioner West.
Aye.
Commissioner Savas.
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader. Commissioner Schull.
Aye.
Madam Chair.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. And no,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, if you're ready, we'll keep on moving. The next policy session is opioid settlement project updates and requests for funding. But first, Chair, would you please convene as the County Board of Health?
I will recess as the Board of County Commissioners and convene as the County Health Board.
So again, this is opioid settlement project updates and requests for funding. Staff from Health, Housing, and Human Services will present. Rod Cook, the Director of Health, Housing, and Human Services, and Philip Mason Joyner, Public Health Division Director. Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. We're here today to present an update on the opioid settlement investments to date, with a focus on projects that addressed internal county department needs. Staff requests approval for use of an additional $1.625 million in opioid settlement funds to sustain current efforts, and an additional $2.14 million to support the Clackamas County Recovery Campus. Philip Mason Joyner is here to talk about the specifics line by line and answer any questions you might have.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Rod, and good afternoon, Chair Smith and Commissioners. For some background for folks watching, Clackamas County anticipates receiving over $24 million in opioid settlement funds that have been negotiated with distributors and retailers who caused harms resulting in the opioid-related and substance use crisis our community is experiencing today. These funds continue to slowly come in, and they will do so for the next 15 years. This week, it was announced that Kroger settlement has been finalized, resulting in $40 million additional dollars coming to the state of Oregon. So Clackamas County will receive a portion of that additional funding beyond the $24 million. We are also waiting for the Purdue Pharma lawsuit settlement. That should be fairly substantial. So we anticipate that Clackamas County will be receiving more than the $24 million that's currently anticipated to be provided. There are 9 cities in Clackamas County who are receiving settlement funds directly. Most of those investments, through our staff conversations with our city partners, those funds are going towards behavioral health co-responders who are embedded within their local law enforcement agencies to respond to mental health and substance-related crises. To date, Clackamas County has received almost $7.4 million. $3.465 million of those dollars have been allocated, with the initial investment of $1.5 million funded last August to support county projects with involvement from internal department and divisions who are helping to guide that work. $1 million was provided this past summer in community grants, and $750,000 was set aside initially for the Recovery Center. Some of these funds are also used for H3S staff time to coordinate all this work happening across the county. The board's investment is focused on supporting our county's recovery-oriented system of care, and this includes a full spectrum of services focused on prevention, treatment, warm handoffs, and recovery programs. In your package, attachment B, it's a wonderful handout developed by PGA that provides a snapshot of each of those projects that were approved by the board last August, the 7 projects, an overview of those projects, their successes, and some metrics for you to review. More information, of course, on each of these programs is available per the board's request at any time. And then in attachment C, that is the funding request, which Rod mentioned that we are coming before you today. to continue to fund 7 of these programs and activities for 2025. It also contains the recommendation to allocate the remaining settlement funds that are currently available in the county's bank account to support the recovery campus. Happy to dive in, answer any questions that the board may have, but thought I would pause there, Chair, and open up the discussion.
Thank you. Commissioner West, you're up.
I do want to give you guys a shout out. I really like the improvements on the website regarding this issue. Good job. I like how you guys talk about kind of the pillars of recovery system treatment, primary prevention. I like the warm handoff programs, planning implementation, focus on recovery, supports. Really good. Thank you. I know that we've talked about using some of this money. Can we just go back to that for the recovery campus? What is that figure again that we're estimating?
2.14?
2.14.
2.14 at this
Yeah.
point, yes.
Are we pretty allocated with these funds, or do we have still some flexibility that wouldn't provide too much of a I don't want to unnecessarily shake things up or cause conflict with things that we've already decided to do or make any big changes. I'm just curious if what we have before us we know is coming in, is that all accounted, is that all allocated out?
So the 1.6 would continue the current programs that you started and stood up about a year ago. So that's the 1.6. And then we have this additional 2.14 at this moment to move over to the recovery center.
Okay.
We anticipate when the new funding comes available, additional funding comes available, we would be back before you to try to get a little bit more going towards a recovery center. So
Okay.
that's our plan. We just don't have it in the bank today.
Rod, do we have any idea, like, is there any way to project like what those funds are? I know you didn't give us a dollar figure on what the projected is. I'm curious if we have any idea.
Ignoring the Kroger information and waiting on Purdue, those are significant settlements. I don't have those figures yet.
Okay.
But we do know from the Department, Oregon DOJ and from Oregon Health Authority that next spring we anticipate receiving a little over $1 million in 2025. And then I anticipate the Kroger and Purdue funding will also be added to that.
Is that an annual 1 million or is it a one-time payment?
They front-loaded it, but $1 million, a couple million
Okay.
the next few years, and then I think it will likely go down
Okay.
as we move forward.
And how this is structured right now is 1 year you were really funding like these internal programs and like I'll call it the foundational programs. And the next year we went out to bid for the public. So you kind of have this rotating as the funds come in, you're funding one part of the system and the next year you're funding the other part of the system. So that way, if any money shrinks or we get more, we can be flexible with that flow.
Okay. That answers my question. Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Scholl.
Gentlemen, the program activities listed on attachment C, are those programs we're currently involved with, or are these new for the upcoming year?
These are a portion of the programs that were approved August of last year.
Already approved.
This would be to sustain the programs into 2025.
Okay. And these programs have all proven productive
Yes.
and worthy of this expenditure?
I feel very confident about that.
Okay.
I really appreciate our county colleagues in the sheriff's office, the DA's office, juvenile, across H3S, who have been involved in this work, working with partners. This handout provides a nice summary. They provide us with lots of information, trying our best to distill it all to make it easy for you and for the public to review.
Yeah. Okay.
We have more information too.
Yeah,
available as
I
well.
just asked that last question to see if we couldn't find, to see if there wasn't possibility that there might be some more money to move over to the Recovery Center project. But if you think these are all good and productive, then I support that.
Any other questions, comments?
One quick question.
Yes, go ahead.
Is that same document, is that on the website? I don't know who's watching our meeting, but we, at the Clackamas County opioid settlement funding, if you Google that, we have a web page with a ton of information on it. I know what you presented is more like allocation of funding. Is that document also on the page for easy access, or I know it probably informs what you've already put on the website.
We'll gladly add it to the website. It's being shared in this policy session first.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
We can absolutely do that.
Commissioner Savas?
So just to summarize, should more additional funds become available, we can apply those as needed to any of the topics we discuss here today or projects.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
Chair, if there's no other questions, I'm willing to make a motion.
Yep, go ahead.
I move for option 1, approve 3.765 million of opioid settlement funds, including 1.625 million for the request specified in attachment C and 2.14 million to support the Clackamas County Recovery Campus.
Second.
Commissioner Savas has moved that we approve the $3.765 million of opioid settlement funds, including $1.62 million for the requests specified in attachment C and $2.14 million to support the Clackamas County Recovery Campus. And Commissioner Schrader has seconded the motion. Any further discussion? Would the clerk please take the poll?
Commissioner Schrader. Aye. Commissioner Scholl.
Aye.
Commissioner West.
Aye.
Commissioner Savas.
Aye.
Madam Chair.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much. Yes, Rod?
I think I've been doing this a lot today, but I just want again, I want to thank the board for having the foresight to fund the early prevention part of this continuum, as well as the treatment part and the recovery part. So you are really being very wise with this money, strategic investments along the continuum, and that's what's going to make for a strong program and make our community more safer. So thank you.
Great, thank you for coming today.